I'm going to start today's clip with a excerpt from a video that's on my channel. It's a live video of Shock playing the Roxy, and I believe this is the second time I played the Roxy with the band, and I can remember being backstage at the Roxy, and we hired a makeup girl for that show, and I can remember kind of being a virgin in that regard, and this girl who also doubled as an exotic dancer was backstage, and she was putting eyeliner on my eyes, and man, I remember like trying to hold my eyes open, and I think she really liked that I was new to the scene and was fresh meat, so to speak. But in this video clip, you can kind of hear the diverse range of influences in this band Shock. I mean, we had a horn section on stage. The bass player is playing slap bass. I'm playing sort of a hybrid of Chili Peppers and Van Halen style guitar. We had a blonde front man in leather. The drummer is playing, a very syncopated beat, and having that horn section on stage, it really set the band apart. But this video is about all the different subgenres. Look, a lot of people go, oh, the Sunset Strip, it's hair bands and this and that. But man, there was a lot of different music on the Sunset Strip. And I'm going to try to touch upon some of the subgenres of hair metal or Sunset Strip bands on my time on the Sunset Strip. Boy Elroy had what I like to call lead singer bingo. The lead singer was the most important member, arguably the most important member of a Sunset Strip band. And as much as I'd like to think that the guitar player was important because I was the guitar player, the singer was really the be all end all. And if you had a great singer, man, you had a greater chance of getting signed. Look, if you weren't that great a guitar player, when you got signed, they just have a guy ghost play guitar on the sessions, and you'd go on your merry way. That was another reality of the Sunset Strip. But being in Boy Elroy, we had many different singers, and the singer kind of defines the band. If you've got a great looking singer, you're gonna have a lot of ladies at the show. If you've got a singer who can move and looks good, and depending on his image, that's going to change the image of the band. And so our first singer was John Watson. He was just, he had a great voice, but an okay image. And then I think very shortly after that, we replaced him with a guy named Rick, whose goal in life was to play one show on the Sunset Strip. And he played his one show, and then he promptly disappeared. And then I believe after that, we got a call to go play Cabo Wabo in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, at the time owned by Van Halen Club. And we didn't have a singer. but we desperately wanted to. This is an opportunity, a once in a lifetime opportunity. A LA promoter called us up and said, "Hey, we're sending bands down to Cabo Wabo. Would you guys like to play?" "Yes, we'd like to play." And we didn't tell them over the phone that we didn't have a singer, so we knew the terms of it, and I think the terms were what it was. I knew there was some catch. You had to have a certain. I think maybe you had to pay for the flight. But once you got down there, you were given one meal a day, and it was 40 beers and 40 shots of tequila. So we thought, man, we get a free place to play. We're playing essentially for free, but they're feeding us and they're putting us up, and they put us up in a little dive. But I'll do a more extensive video about that gig. But so we got on Music Connection magazine, got the local issue, and found a singer in there who we knew wasn't the guy that we would play on the strip with, but he was good enough to take down to Mexico and have a little fiesta, as they say. And his name was Rocky. Okay, so we had Rocky, we had John Watson, we had Rick, and then we had Rocky for a week-long gig down at the Cabo Wabo, San Lucas, Mexico. And let's see, after Rocky, I believe was Jade. And I've told the story of Jade on my channel. It's a tragic story. And if you have not seen that, try and find that on my channel. It's another Sunset Strip singer story, and it should be easy to find. And that was a very tragic story with Jade, but ultimately he didn't have the voice that we knew that could carry us to the next level. And so after Jade, we found a young guy. And by this time, I think, man, we were getting close to 26 years old, 25. I mean, it seems like you're 25, 26, you're almost a has-been in LA at that time. So we found a young guy, and I think he was just 20 years old, 19 or 20 years old, named Brian. And that was the last singer that we had in Boy Elroy. And Boy Elroy, we were a little bit different. Look, everybody in Boy Elroy had long hair. And but we weren't really glam. Shock and really wasn't like a glam band. We all had long hair, but it was essentially a funky, hard rock band. And that was kind of what carried us through from Shock to Boy Elroy. But what were the other types of bands on the strip? You had the bands that were obviously Van Halen influenced. And I would say, what a band like Hans Naughty, I think they were definitely a band that had that, Van Halen influence. And I think you could say that my buddies in New Haven, they were sort of Van Halen influenced with keyboards in their band. And, those were, I'd say, more of the, say, traditional hard rock that could play to people in the Midwest and would have their own, sound, but also be acceptable to, look, I stayed acceptable to my family back home. I didn't go too glam and too over the top. But, then you had bands like Anna Black, who, to my eyes, looked a lot like Motley Crue. They were cut from that mold. And I would say, there was a band called Creature. Creature was a band that was very much cut from the Kiss mold. In fact, I think they had run into some legal trouble, maybe with Kiss. I'm not sure about that. If you know more about Creature, let me know in the comments. And those were bands that were cut kind of from that cloth. So with Guns N' Roses, you had what a guy in my comments had said, the gutter gypsy look. And I had seen other bands with this look, even kind of before Guns N' Roses were on my radar, there was a band that lived in a crappy apartment next to crappy apartment that I lived in when I lived in Hollywood. It was called Sycamore Lanai, and it was a dive, man. It's still, that building is still there. It is very rough. Man, you got to imagine, like, Hollywood was just over the top back in those days. You know, there were so many people walking around who you thought were probably in a band or, had that rock star look. And even, if it was girls with the Sunset Strip look, you could literally identify people from your clan. And I would say the rock and roll clan, you could identify them immediately. You could look at a girl and know that she was into hair metal bands. And, it would help when you're promoting your band is you could say, hey, those chicks, they look like they just came from a Dokken concert. Let's go talk to them. But there was, when I lived in that super rough apartment building in Hollywood, there was a band that lived next door, and it was an even more divier apartment. And in this apartment, man, were people that were probably on extreme substances, let's just say, perhaps those that were injectable. But I digress. But man, there was a lady of the night that lived in that apartment, and she had gigantic gazongas. It seemed like a burden. They were so huge, and you would see her going out and walking Hollywood Boulevard. Ads in Music Connection looking for, Johnny Thunder's look-alike on guitar. And you could say Izzy Stradlin from Guns N' Roses might have been the most well-known version of that. The band LA Guns, their rhythm guitar player had that look. But even more so, you would see bands that you'd never heard of, that were on the scene, and guys that just adopted that look. And man, it didn't just look like they were putting on an image. It looked like they were living that lifestyle, the gutter gypsy lifestyle. And you could say, Faster Pussycat kind of had that same look, but I don't know. I mean, those guys were partying and certainly had a lot of ladies. But man, I think there were guys that were really, really over the top living that lifestyle. So much so that their band probably played a handful of shows and disappeared into addiction or death or who knows what. I mean, there were so many bands. And, I think one of the things that makes my channel so interesting is people wonder what happened to those bands. Well, I'm one story of a guy that's now here to tell the tale. But the gutter gypsy look was a very real thing, and it was like a lifestyle. I mean, Guns N' Roses highlighted sort of the gutter gypsy look, but man, there were many, many bands that had that image. Then you had bands like Tryxx, right? And Tryxx was, their image was so over the top that if you were a guy from the Midwest or from the South like me, it just wasn't something you could fathom dressing like. It just didn't look to me like, something I would want to try and pull off. And it was humorous, I think, to a lot of people that didn't understand it. If you were a muso, which I was a muso that was dipping my toe in the Sunset Strip world, having that much focus on an image and everybody looking the same and everybody kind of having the same hairdo and all that. And look, man, some of those guys, there were some guys that, you would say, were traditionally, good looking or looked good, in their role as a hair band. But then there were bands like, Tryxx who you go, man, if these guys took off these outfits and just wore regular clothes, man, they might be some ugly SOBs. And so maybe this was a way for these guys to, to doll themselves up and make themselves different. And, I think a lot of people were under the impression that if I just develop an image, if I just develop this cartoon, thing that I could get signed, that we'd be huge, we'd be the next big thing. But, Hollywood was a bit of a bubble. The bands there were a bit of a bubble. And the reality is, a lot of what was going down on the Sunset Strip might not play as well in the Midwest. It might not have been accepted. People were willing to adopt Guns N' Roses. But you know what? That was still a stretch for some people who could not relate to guys living in the gutter. Um, and so Tryxx was kind of leading in another direction. I would say like the next thing was sort of the glamour punk thing that was going on down in LA. And you had bands like Big Bang Babies and the Glamour Punks and Foxy Rocks. And let's see, some people put Tryxx in that category, but what the Glamour Punk thing was like Kool-Aid hair, right? Like bright red, like almost clown greens, blues. And you could argue that the Zeros were sort of a glamour punk band because every member of the band had purple hair and they wore these, sort of matching outfits and stuff like that. And, I feel like they were a little more like the Ramones or a little more punk rock, but they definitely could be put in that category. And, the Kool-Aid hair, the extreme, like almost kabuki makeup, almost sort of a transvestite look. The glamour punk thing, man, was its own unique movement. And people like to lump like all the Sunset Strip bands in with Poison and bands like that. But the reality is, Poison was sort of the mild compared to some of the other stuff that was on the Sunset Strip. And so, with these glamour punk bands, with these bands with Kool-Aid hair and all this wild, makeup and stuff. And like I said, man, it's almost now when I look at it, it's like modern day drag queens. If you can imagine four modern day drag queens with Kool-Aid hair and extreme makeup and like lip liner and bright red lipstick. Look, when those guys would hit the strip with their flyers, man, people would take notice. And there were a lot of girls that really liked those bands. A lot of those bands would have huge female followings. And, it was something that said, even Charlie Murphy said in one of his Real Hollywood Stories about the guys that looked the most femme got the most girls. And there was a certain truth to that, man. If you were willing to go that far and if you were willing to doll yourself up that much, even before anybody ever heard anything that you played, it would attract a very large female following. One other type of group that you would started to see emerge on the strip were LA thrash bands. And I'd like you, if you know some of the heavier LA bands, some of the bands that were a little more thrash, please let me know in the comments. But I can say that, Odin, with their first record, man, they were a very heavy band and they were headed on that thrash market. And I think maybe they changed their direction when they saw the popularity of what was going on the strip. Maybe Randy O will get in the comments and let us know why they kind of changed direction. But man, most of the thrash bands seem to come from up north. And some of those bands would come down and play shows, on the Sunset Strip. But they were not LA bands. And it seemed like, Guns N' Roses were the last huge Sunset Strip band, a gutter gypsy band. But, there were bands like Tuff, who were more cut from the Van Halen Poison mold. There was Life, Sex, and Death, which was its own completely unique thing. And I did a video on Life, Sex, and Death on my channel. They were the one band that I saw on the strip that just blew me away. And if you don't know about them, I mean, they were three guys in a band with a lead singer that looked like a homeless person. That's the best way to describe it. You know, if you know of some other subgenres of LA bands, please let me know in the comments. And if you were a member of a Sunset Strip band and you're watching this video, hit me up in the comments. I'd love to have you come on the channel and tell your story sometime because, man, it is a fascinating time. It was certainly a wild ride. There were lots of rock and rollers on that strip, and man, and I'd love to hear more about your story on the Sunset Strip.